Because of his size, the Alpha King was rejected by every woman until an Omega appeared. Mist clung to the valleys like a heavy, gray cloak, and the towers of the castle rose above it like silent sentinels. At the heart of this ancient fortress sat King Arion, known throughout the lands as the Alpha King. His size was immense, unmatched by any living man, and his strength legendary. Yet, despite the respect he commanded from soldiers and advisors alike, Arion sat alone, the loneliness of his throne heavier than the iron crown he wore. Every woman who had approached him over the years had recoiled in fear or whispered in secret about the giant king. Their rejection had carved deep scars in Arion's heart. He was feared, yes, but never loved. And in the quiet of the night, when the torches burned low and the halls echoed with silence, he felt the ache of emptiness more keenly than any pain of battle. Arion walked through the castle corridors, each step shaking the stones beneath his feet. His armor, polished yet worn from countless battles, clinked softly. He paused at the gallery of past kings and queens, portraits of ancestors whose eyes seemed to judge him even in death. Some had been cruel, others just distant, but all had loved and been loved in ways he could not. A sigh escaped him as he pressed a hand to the cold stone wall. "Why do they all turn away?" he muttered under his breath. "Is it my size or something deeper that makes love impossible for me?" Outside, the storm rumbled through the mountains. Lightning tore across the sky, illuminating the castle's spires. Arion's mind drifted to the old legends whispered by the court, stories of giants and kings who had been cursed for their power and left to solitude. His ancestors had spoken of prophecy and redemption, but Arion had long thought them meaningless tales. Until tonight. A soft knock echoed through the main gates. The guards, seasoned and wary, exchanged nervous glances. The castle rarely saw travelers, and never women brave enough to approach the Alpha King. The doors opened, and a figure appeared in the mist. She was small compared to Arion, delicate yet strong in posture, and her eyes held a quiet courage that even the soldiers sensed. "Who comes to Varinthia at this hour?" one guard demanded. "I am Alara," the woman said, her voice steady despite the storm. "I seek refuge and guidance. I mean no harm." The guards hesitated. Alara's calmness was unusual, almost unnatural in its certainty. Slowly, they allowed her inside. Wordlessly, Arion descended from his throne room and entered the main hall, his shadow falling over the figure before him. The first thing Arion noticed was her gaze. She did not flinch, nor did she shrink back. Instead, her eyes met his with an intensity that stirred something long dormant in him, a flicker of hope, fragile yet undeniable. "You are not afraid?" he asked, his voice deep, resonant with the power of his size. "I have faced storms before," Alara replied. "Neither thunder nor shadow frightens me, my lord." Arion's heart thumped in a rhythm he had almost forgotten. No one had ever spoken to him like that, as if his size were not a wall but a shield to be trusted. For the first time in decades, he felt curiosity untainted by fear. "Very well," he said, his tone softer than he intended. "You may remain, but know this, many who enter my castle leave as whispers, afraid of the giant who rules here." "I am not afraid," she said again, and there was no bravado in her voice, only certainty. Days passed, and Alara settled into the castle with quiet grace. She wandered the halls, speaking to the servants and tending to the wounded soldiers returning from border skirmishes. Arion watched her from a distance, intrigued by the way she moved through the castle as if it were her own home. Her presence brought warmth to the cold stones and laughter to the empty corridors. One evening he found her in the garden, kneeling by a bed of night-blooming flowers. The petals glowed faintly in the moonlight, and the scent was intoxicating. Arion approached quietly, so as not to startle her. "Do you always walk through the gardens alone?" he asked. Alara looked up and smiled, a soft curve of lips that seemed to light the dark around her. "I like the quiet," she said. It is in quiet moments that one sees the truth of the world. Arian considered her words. He had always believed strength was the path to respect and love. Yet here was someone who saw beyond power, who valued the subtle truths hidden in silence and shadow. "Truth, you say?" he asked. "And what truth have you found in these gardens?" Alara tilted her head, her hair catching the moonlight like threads of silver. "That even the strongest king can feel lonely. That even the mightiest shadow can need light." The word struck Arian like a sword through armor. For decades he had hidden behind his size and power, believing that no one could love the man beneath the giant. And yet in her eyes he saw acceptance, perhaps even understanding. He did not know how to respond. Words often failed him, and gestures of affection were foreign. So instead he simply stayed, standing silently beside her, letting the night and the garden speak for both of them. But as peace settled over the castle, whispers of danger crept in. Some of the court viewed Alara's presence with suspicion. Rumors of a prophecy began to circulate. "The one who embraces the giant shall awaken the kingdom's heart." Few believed in old legends, yet the words found their way to Arian's ears. "Am I truly meant to find someone who can accept me?" he asked himself in the darkness of his chamber. "Or is this merely another illusion, a cruel trick of fate?" Alara, unaware of the storm brewing in the halls, continued her quiet work. One night she ventured to the library and discovered a hidden passage, a spiral staircase descending into the forgotten chambers of the castle. Dust thickened the air, and cobwebs clung to ancient stone walls. Curiosity led her forward, and she found murals depicting kings and queens of old, heroes who had loved and lost, warriors who had fought curses and shadows alike. One mural caught her attention, a giant figure, wings of silver etched into the stone behind him, standing beside a smaller figure who held his hand. Alara traced the lines with her fingers, whispering, "Could this be him? The Alpha King who is feared and lonely?" Suddenly a shadow fell over the mural. Arian's massive frame filled the doorway, his eyes intense yet not angry. "That is my ancestor," he said, his voice reverberating in the chamber. "He was feared like I am, loved by none until one came who dared to see beyond the fear." Alara looked up at him, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "And are you waiting for such a one, my king?" Arian felt a strange mix of fear and hope. The size and power he had carried as armor suddenly felt heavier, yet the thought that someone could truly see him, beyond the walls of muscle and height, was intoxicating. The moment stretched, fragile as glass, and then the distant sound of a horn shattered the silence. The guards ran past the hall, shouting warnings. Arian's instincts flared. The kingdom was under threat, an approaching army from a rival lord, one who had long coveted Varinthia's lands. Arian's hand brushed Alara's, almost unintentionally, a fleeting touch that carried the weight of his heart. "Stay behind me," he said, not as a command but as a plea. "I cannot promise your safety, yet I cannot let harm touch you." Alara nodded, a quiet strength shining in her eyes. "I am not afraid," she said, mirroring her words from the first night. "But I will face it with you." For the first time in his life, Arian did not feel the crushing solitude of his throne. Though danger approached, though shadows of the past whispered of failure and loss, he felt a spark of connection, a fragile, luminous thread linking his heart to another. The castle gates rattled as the storm outside mirrored the storm within the walls. Arian stood tall, a giant among men, yet no longer alone. At his side, the Omega woman who feared nothing met his gaze, and in that look was the unspoken promise of hope, of love, and perhaps of redemption. The horn blared again, louder this time, signaling the arrival of the rival army. Arian's heart thundered not only with fear of the battle to come, but with anticipation for the journey that lay ahead. For in Alara, he sensed the possibility of a future he had never dared to imagine. A future where the Alpha King might finally find someone who could love him, not for his size or power, but for the man beneath. And as the gates of Varinthia began to shake under the first blows of war, Arian's eyes never left hers. Somewhere in the storm, amidst the clash of swords and the roar of thunder, the lonely king felt the faintest glimmer of something he had believed lost forever. Cliffhanger, the gates splintered under the rival lord's army and the castle trembled. Arian turned to Alara, the first flicker of fear in his giant heart showing, but also a spark of hope. "Hold my hand," he whispered. "If we are to survive, we do it together." The morning sun broke through the storm clouds, casting pale light across the shattered gates of Varinthia. Wood splintered, stones cracked, and the distant echo of horns lingered in the mist. Yet inside the castle, Arian stood tall, his immense form a wall of protection, while Alara remained at his side, calm despite the chaos. The rival lord's army had arrived, seeking to claim Varinthia's riches and power. Arian's warriors rallied, their loyalty unwavering, but even the bravest among them trembled before the might of the enemy. Arian's heart pounded, not from fear of the battle itself, for he had faced hundreds, but from the thought of Alara, who had shown no fear the night before. "Stay close," he told her, his voice low, almost a growl. "The battlefield is no place for someone unarmed." "I am not unarmed," Alara said softly, her eyes bright with determination. "I can help. Let me." Arian studied her for a moment, then nodded. He realized she would follow him into the fire, no matter the danger. And perhaps, he thought, that was the first true measure of courage he had ever seen. The clash came quickly. Soldiers collided, swords and shields ringing against one another. The enemy was numerous, but Arian's size and strength gave him an advantage. He moved with terrifying speed for someone of his stature, swinging his great sword in wide arcs that felled several men at once. Yet his eyes always sought Alara, who moved among the injured and the weak, guiding them to safety with a calm efficiency that impressed even him. In a quiet moment between battles, Arian found her kneeling beside a wounded soldier, her hands steady as she wrapped a bandage. He approached silently, his massive shadow falling over her. "You are fearless," he said, almost as an observation rather than a question. "I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear," Alara replied, "but the choice to act despite it." Arian's chest tightened. How many times had he let fear, of rejection, of loneliness, hold him back? And now, standing before her, he realized that some battles were not fought with swords but with hearts. The rival lord's army pressed closer. Arian roared, a sound that shook the very walls of the castle, and charged into the enemy ranks. Alara did not follow with a weapon, yet her presence inspired the soldiers around her, giving them courage to hold their ground. Hours passed like minutes, the sun climbing high into a sky still streaked with storm clouds. By mid-afternoon, the enemy began to retreat, exhausted and shaken by the unexpected strength of Varinthia's defenders. Arian's warriors cheered, but he remained focused on Alara, who was tending to the last of the wounded soldiers. "You risked yourself today," he said quietly as he approached her once more. "I risk myself every day," she replied, looking up at him without fear. "And I do it not for you, not for the crown, but because it is the right thing to do." Her words struck him deeply. She did not flatter him, nor did she cower before his power. She spoke with honesty and integrity, qualities he had longed for but never found in another. As the battle ended and the enemy fled, Arian led Alara to the upper terraces of the castle. The wind swept through their hair, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. Below them, the kingdom stretched in misty folds, the land scarred by the morning's clash. "Why are you here?" he asked finally, his voice quiet. "Not out of fear, not seeking reward. Why come to a castle where the king himself is feared and rejected?" Alara gazed at the horizon, the light of the setting sun catching the silver strands in her hair. "Because someone must see the truth," she said softly, "and I have longed to find a place where I am needed, where I can make a difference." Arian considered this, the wind tugging at his cloak. He had spent decades surrounded by people who obeyed him out of fear or respect, but no one had ever sought him out for his heart. And here was Alara, choosing him, not because he was king, but because he needed someone to see him as he truly was. The days that followed were a slow, careful dance of trust and discovery. Arian began to allow Alara into parts of the castle he had never shown anyone: the private chambers where he trained alone, the library filled with ancient texts, and the gardens where he walked at night to think. She moved through these spaces without fear, her presence softening the hard edges of his solitude. One evening, as the moon rose high, Arian invited Alara to the Gallery of Ancestors. He showed her the portraits of kings and queens who had ruled Varinthia, their faces stern or noble, their eyes seeming to follow them as they walked. "They all sought love," he said quietly, "and they all failed in some way. I am no different." Alara studied the faces in silence, then turned to him. Perhaps they failed because they looked for love in the wrong place. Perhaps love is not about crowns or strength, but about courage and understanding. Arian felt a warmth in his chest he had not known before. Here was someone who saw the truth of him, who looked past the size and the armor to the man beneath. The bond between them deepened, not through grand gestures or declarations, but through quiet moments of understanding. They spoke of dreams, of regrets, and of the burdens they carried. Arian found himself laughing at her subtle humor, smiling at her insight, and slowly, hesitatingly, opening his heart in ways he had thought impossible. Yet not all within the castle were pleased. Whispers reached the ears of Arian's advisors and court members, whispers of danger, of prophecy, and of an Omega who might change the course of the kingdom. Some feared that Alara's influence would weaken the king, others feared she might be a spy. Rumors began to spread, creating tension that pressed on Arian as heavily as the armor he wore. One night, Alara discovered a hidden chamber beneath the castle, a spiral staircase leading to a hall filled with murals and carvings of the kingdom's history. She called Arian to see it. "What is this place?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "It is where our ancestors recorded the triumphs and failures of Varinthia," Arian explained, "and where the curse began." Alara studied the carvings carefully. They depicted giants, warriors, and smaller figures beside them, often holding their hands, offering trust and courage. One mural in particular caught her attention: a giant king, much like Arian, standing beside a smaller figure who gazed up at him without fear. "Do you think this could be true?" she whispered. "That love can break a curse." Arian stared at the mural, his heart tight. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have waited for decades, rejected by all. And yet, perhaps the one who can see me truly, despite my size, can change everything." Their moment was interrupted by a distant rumble. Arian's senses, trained over years of battle, detected movement outside the castle walls. He rushed to the gates with Alara following closely, their hands brushing in a fleeting, almost accidental touch that spoke of trust and connection. The enemy had not truly retreated. A smaller contingent of the rival lord's soldiers had returned, seeking revenge for their earlier defeat. Arian roared, a sound that shook the walls, and charged once more into battle. Alara remained behind the front lines, guiding the soldiers and caring for the wounded. Yet each time Arian's massive form swung his sword, she could see the strain beneath his strength, the fear of losing control, the vulnerability hidden behind his size. After the skirmish ended, Arian found her again in the gardens, where the moonlight bathed them in silver. He knelt beside her, his great hands folded together, no longer wielding a sword but seeking connection. "You are unlike any I have ever known," he said softly. "You see me, not as a giant, not as a king, but as me." "Why?" Alara looked up, her gaze unwavering. "Because that is what courage looks like," she replied. "Not in battle, not in strength, but in facing the truth and accepting it. And you, Arian, have faced your truth, even if you do not see it yet." A quiet peace settled over them, fragile and luminous. For the first time, Arion felt that he was not alone. And though the danger of the enemy still loomed, though whispers of prophecy haunted the castle halls, he realized that the greatest battle was not with swords or armies, but with the walls around his heart. And now, standing beside him, Alara offered a hand, not as a guide nor as a servant, but as a companion, someone who might walk beside him through shadow and storm. Cliffhanger. From the mist outside, a shadowy figure appeared atop the hill beyond the castle, watching, waiting. And in their gaze was the promise of a challenge that would test not only Arion's strength, but the fragile bond forming between him and the Omega woman who feared nothing. The shadow atop the distant hill did not move. From that high vantage point, it watched Varinthia's castle with an unblinking patience. Arion noticed it first at dawn, when the mist still clung to the valleys and the soldiers were recovering from the previous skirmishes. Something about the figure unsettled him, not its size, but the sense of intent it carried, as though it knew the kingdom's secrets and was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Alara walked beside him through the gardens, her eyes calm despite the tension in the air. "Who is it?" she asked. "I do not know," Arion admitted, "but it is not an idle watcher. Whoever that is, they have come for something, perhaps for me or perhaps for the kingdom itself." Alara's hand brushed against his, a subtle gesture of reassurance. "Then we face it together," she said simply. The day began with a tense calm. Soldiers patrolled the walls, archers kept watch from the towers, and Arion trained in the courtyard, practicing strikes and movements to anticipate any attack. Yet even in the midst of preparation, his thoughts often strayed to Alara. There was something about her presence that softened his loneliness, yet also stirred an unfamiliar vulnerability. By midday, the shadow had descended. A small contingent of heavily armored riders charged toward the gates, their banners black with a twisted emblem. Arion roared, calling his warriors to arms, and the castle shook with the sound of battle once again. This time, however, the fight was different. The enemy moved with careful precision, avoiding the direct clash with Arion at first, instead focusing on testing the castle's defenses. Alara guided the soldiers, instructing them to hold positions and tend to the wounded, her calmness a steady anchor in the chaos. During a lull in the fighting, Arion found himself standing before a mirror in the castle's armory. He stared at his reflection, the towering figure of the Alpha King, clad in armor that gleamed in the flickering torchlight. He saw the lines of worry etched into his face, the shadows beneath his eyes from sleepless nights, and the ache of solitude that had never left him. "Is this all I am?" he whispered to himself. "A giant, a weapon, or can I truly be something more?" Alara approached quietly, placing a hand on his arm. "You are more," she said. "You have always been more. But to see it yourself, you must let go of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of what others think of you." Her words cut through him, piercing the armor he had built around his heart. All his life, he had measured worth in strength, in power, in size. Yet here was someone who saw him for who he truly was, and she asked nothing in return except that he believe in himself. The enemy pressed harder as night fell. Torches flared along the walls, casting long shadows that danced like spirits across the courtyard. Arion's sword flashed in the torchlight, felling opponents with force and precision, yet he also fought with a new awareness, an understanding that his strength alone would not be enough. He needed strategy, courage, and the wisdom that Alara brought. At one point, a group of enemy soldiers breached a side gate, threatening the castle's inner courtyard. Arion moved with incredible speed, his massive form blocking the attackers, while Alara directed the castle guards to flank them. Together, their coordination became almost seamless, giant strength paired with sharp intelligence, raw power balanced by careful thought. After the battle subsided, the castle was battered but standing. Arion and Alara walked through the quiet halls, tending to soldiers and inspecting damages. The danger outside was not yet gone, but for a moment there was a fragile peace. In the library, Arian finally opened up about his past. He spoke of the loneliness that had haunted him since youth, of every failed attempt at companionship, and of the curse whispered in old legends, that a giant king could never find love unless the one who embraced him saw beyond fear. Alara listened without judgment. She did not flinch at his words, nor did she turn away from the pain he revealed. Instead, she placed her hand over his, a silent pledge of understanding. "You are not defined by fear," she said softly. "You are defined by what you choose to do with your strength. And right now, you choose to fight not only for yourself, but for everyone who depends on you." Arian felt a warmth he had not known in years, a sense that he could be more than the solitary figure he had been. But that warmth came with a shadow, a whisper that danger was far from over. The next day, Arian and Alara explored the castle's hidden chambers, guided by the murals Alara had discovered earlier. They found depictions of past kings and queens, each facing trials of courage, loyalty, and love. One mural in particular showed a giant king with a smaller figure beside him, holding his hand as they faced a shadowed enemy. "Do you see this?" Arian asked, his voice hushed. "They fought together, and only together did they succeed," Alara nodded. "That is what you must do, Arian, not alone, and perhaps this is why I am here." Their growing bond became undeniable. In quiet moments they shared stories of childhood, fears, and dreams. Arian laughed at her clever observations, while Alara admired his strength tempered by patience and care. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where he was not alone, where his size and power were no longer barriers, but part of a partnership built on trust. Yet the shadow on the hill remained, watching, patient and silent. One evening, a messenger arrived from the outer lands, bearing news that chilled the castle to its core. The rival lord had not been defeated entirely. Reinforcements were marching under the cover of night, bringing with them dark magic rumored to break walls, gates, and even the hearts of those who resisted. Arian clenched his fists, the veins in his massive arms visible even beneath his armor. "They think they can destroy what I have built," he muttered. "They think fear alone can topple the Alpha King." Alara stood beside him, placing a hand on his chest. "Then we show them courage," she said. "Together we will not falter. Together we will protect what is ours." The next morning the enemy arrived in full force. Lightning cracked across the sky as they advanced, their banners black against the storm clouds. Arian's roar echoed over the battlefield, a sound that shook the earth itself. Soldiers rallied, shields raised, and arrows flew. Alara moved among the injured, directing soldiers with calm authority. Her courage inspired the weary fighters, giving them strength to hold their ground. Every clash of swords, every echoing shout, reminded Arian of the truth she had shown him. Strength alone was not enough. Courage, trust, and love were equally powerful weapons. In the midst of battle, Arian faced the rival lord himself, a towering figure, cruel and cunning. They clashed with a force that made the castle walls tremble. Arian fought not just with muscle, but with the hope that Alara had ignited in his heart. He was fighting for more than the kingdom. He was fighting for connection, for the possibility of being seen, truly seen. Meanwhile, Alara discovered a hidden entrance to the enemy's camp, using her wits to disable traps and mislead the soldiers. Her actions allowed Arian's forces to gain the upper hand, turning the tide of battle. She was not a warrior in the traditional sense, yet her courage and intelligence proved invaluable, complementing Arian's raw power. After hours of struggle, the enemy began to retreat. The castle stood, battered but unbroken. Arian returned to Alara, his chest heaving, armor scorched and dented, yet eyes shining with admiration and gratitude. You were amazing," he said simply, his deep voice trembling slightly. "I could not have done it without you." Alara smiled, brushing a streak of soot from her cheek. And you could not have done it without me. We are stronger together. That night, as the castle settled into uneasy quiet, Arian and Alara walked the terraces looking out over the kingdom. Stars emerged from behind storm clouds, glimmering like distant promises. You have changed everything for me, Arian said softly. Not the kingdom me. I have lived so long in fear, in solitude, and now, for the first time, I feel something I thought impossible. Alara turned to him, her gaze steady and warm. And what is that? Hope, he whispered. Hope that I can be seen and loved for who I truly am. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind softened, the shadows retreated, and the castle itself seemed to pulse with the quiet magic of their connection. Yet the shadow on the hill had not disappeared. Watching, always watching. The next trial was coming, one that would test not just Arian's strength, but the bond forming between him and Alara, a trial that would demand courage, trust, and the willingness to face the darkness within themselves. Cliffhanger, a messenger arrived in the dead of night, battered and bloodied. His message was clear. The rival lord has allied with a dark sorcerer. They march at dawn. Your kingdom and your hearts will be tested beyond anything you have faced before. Dawn broke over Varinthia, pale and fragile, as if the sun itself feared the coming battle. The mist rolled across the valleys, curling around the castle walls like fingers of shadow. From the highest tower, Arian watched the horizon. The rival lord had returned, this time allied with a dark sorcerer, their forces larger and more dangerous than before. Arian's massive hands clenched the stone battlements. His heart thumped not with fear but with determination. The kingdom had survived before, and this time he would not face the enemy alone. Alara stepped beside him, calm and steady. Her hand brushed his, and the gesture sent warmth through him, a silent pledge that they would face this trial together. They have power we cannot yet see, she said softly, but courage and unity can match any magic. Arian nodded. Then we fight not just with swords but with trust, with each other. The castle gates shuddered as the enemy approached. Arian descended into the courtyard where soldiers had formed ranks, their faces tense but hopeful. Alara moved among them, guiding strategies and assigning positions, her calm authority lifting morale. Even in the shadow of the dark sorcerer, their bond inspired hope. The battle began with a thunderous roar. The enemy surged forward, their dark magic sparking against the shields and armor of Varinthia's defenders. Arian waded into the front lines, swinging his great sword in wide arcs, crushing armor and bone alike. Yet he fought with something new, not just raw power, but awareness, patience, and cooperation with Alara's guidance. Alara had discovered a flaw in the enemy's formation. The dark sorcerer relied on a central amulet that focused his magic. She relayed the information to Arian, who adjusted his attack. With immense speed, he cut through the ranks, reaching the sorcerer's guard and creating an opening. The sorcerer raised his staff, summoning bolts of shadow that tore through the courtyard. Arian shielded Alara, his massive frame absorbing the blasts without faltering. For the first time, he felt the true weight of vulnerability, not from the enemy, but from caring for someone else's safety above his own. "You must trust me," he roared, his voice echoing like a mountain thunder. Alara met his gaze, steady and unwavering. "I do," she replied, "and I trust us." With a coordinated effort they struck. Arian smashed through the sorcerer's defenses, while Alara used her knowledge of the castle's hidden passages to flank the enemy. Together, they moved as one, a giant of immense strength, and a smaller figure of unmatched courage and intelligence. Each complemented the other, their bond a weapon sharper than any blade. But the sorcerer was cunning. He unleashed a wave of dark energy that fractured the ground beneath them, sending soldiers stumbling and walls crumbling. Arian's massive arms shielded Alara, but the impact threw him backward, sending him crashing against the stone battlements. Pain lanced through him, yet he rose immediately. Alara rushed to his side. "Are you hurt?" she asked, concern flickering across her face. "I am fine," he said, grimacing but steady. "But you be careful." "No," she replied firmly. "We do this together." In that moment, Arian realized the depth of their bond. Strength alone had never saved him before. Only connection, trust, and courage born from love could overcome the darkness threatening the kingdom. They pressed forward. Arian's sword clashed with the sorcerer's staff, sparks flying as shadow met steel. Alara guided him to a vulnerable spot, and with a final, tremendous swing, Arian shattered the amulet. The sorcerer screamed, his power collapsing inward, and the dark energy dissipated like mist under the sun. The enemy's army faltered without their leader. Soldiers retreated, fleeing the castle grounds as Arian and Alara stood victorious in the courtyard. The kingdom was safe, yet the battle had not only tested their strength, but their hearts. Later, as the sun rose fully, casting golden light across the valley, Arian and Alara walked the gardens, where the flowers glimmered with dew and the mist of battle had begun to fade. The castle, though scarred, stood tall, a testament to resilience and unity. Arian paused beneath the night-blooming flowers they had admired in Part 1. He looked down at Alara, the Omega who had seen him for who he truly was. His massive hands gently took hers, and for a moment the world felt quiet and safe. "You have changed me," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "Not just for the kingdom, but for myself. I have lived so long in solitude, and now I see that I am capable of more than fear, more than rejection. I can be loved." Alara's eyes softened. "You have always been worthy of love, Arian. You just needed someone willing to see it." The wind whispered through the garden, carrying petals that danced around them like a blessing. Arian knelt, not out of submission but as a gesture of trust and humility. "Then let us face the future together, not as king and subject, not as giant and Omega, but as two hearts standing side by side." Alara nodded, tears glimmering in her eyes. "I will," she said, "forever." The castle itself seemed to breathe with relief, as though it had been waiting for this moment for centuries. The curse that had haunted Arian's lineage, fear, isolation, rejection, was lifted not through magic alone, but through courage, trust, and love. In the days that followed, Arian and Alara worked together to rebuild what had been damaged. Soldiers who had fought beside them spoke of a new energy in the kingdom, a sense that the land itself recognized the harmony between the king and the Omega. Villagers returned, inspired by the courage of their leaders. The kingdom began to heal, as did Arian's heart. One evening, Arian took Alara to the highest tower, where they could see the valleys and mountains stretching endlessly. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Look," he said, pointing to the distant horizon. "This kingdom, this life, it is ours, and we have fought together to protect it." Alara leaned into him, her hand resting on his arm. "And we will continue to protect it, together." For the first time in his life, Arian felt completely whole, not because he was the Alpha King, not because of his size or power, but because he had found someone who saw him, accepted him, and chose to stand beside him. Love, he realized, was the greatest power of all. Night fell and stars emerged, glimmering like scattered diamonds across the sky. Arian and Alara remained on the tower, silent except for the wind and the distant murmur of the kingdom. They did not speak of the past, nor of the battles ahead. They simply existed in that moment, two souls united by courage, trust, and unwavering connection. Arian whispered almost to himself, "Because of you, I am no longer alone." Alara smiled, leaning against him. "And because of you, I am home." The castle, the kingdom, and their hearts had all been tested. The shadows had been faced, the curse confronted, and the impossible achieved. And now, as they stood together on the tower, the first true peace in decades settled over Varinthia. The mountains seemed less ominous, the mist lighter, and the wind softer. The future was uncertain, as all futures are, but they would face it together. Hand in hand, heart with heart, the Alpha King and the Omega had not only saved a kingdom, they had discovered the redemption and love that had eluded generations before them. For Arian, his size and strength were no longer walls but a part of who he was, a protector, a partner, and a man capable of love. And for Ilara, courage and trust had led her to a place she could call home. The prophecy had been fulfilled in a way no one had expected. The one who embraces the giant awakens the kingdom's heart, and together they would continue to walk forward, united, fearless, and stronger than any shadow that might come. Epilogue cliffhanger. As night fully fell, a gentle breeze carried whispers across the castle walls, ancestors long past, observing and smiling. In the distance, beyond the mountains, a new dawn awaited, hinting at adventures and trials yet to come. But for now, the kingdom rested, and the Alpha King and his Omega stood together, a testament to the power of courage, trust, and enduring love.